Hey guys, Chris here. So right behind me we have the 2018 Volvo XC90 T8 Inscription, and we also have the 2018 Volvo XC60 T8 Inscription. This is a video a lot of you guys have been waiting for. This is a video I'm very excited to finally be able to film, have these two cars gathered together, have them at the same time. So in today's video, I'm going to give you guys a comparison of these two cars. So first off, we're going to start off here in the 2018 Volvo XC60. I have a video of the interior and exterior tour on this car, so for a full video on that, please click the link up there in the right corner. This exterior color is called Electric Silver, and this is the brown interior. This also has the linear wood, though it looks very much different than the patterns that you get in the XC90. It has a very different pattern. We'll see that when we hop into the XC90. But first impressions while getting into this cabin is that quality is very, very high, you know, compared to something like an Audi A4 or an Audi Q5, which is, well, in the same class of vehicle. This thing just feels much more solid. It's much simpler in the design. Audi have nicer switchgear. I've had said this so many times before, but the overall feeling of quality in here, the feeling of solidity of the cabins and the material choices, the metals and the leathers, everything you touch and feel just feels a really high quality. Pulling away from standstill in both these cars will be very, very similar, actually, because they both have the same drivetrain, which is a plug-in hybrid T8 drivetrain. T8 is the designation Volvo give this drivetrain. It's a 4-cylinder, 2-liter turbocharged and supercharged gas engine up front and an electric motor out rear. Total combined system horsepower is 407 horsepower for the 2018 model year. Here in Europe, the 2019 is actually a bit less. It's 390 because of particle filters, new emissions standards and stuff like that in Europe. And in the US, I think it's 400 dead, also due to different emission standards. I just want to quickly, because while I drove this car earlier, this XC60 with this beautiful brown leather interior, I got a flashback to the first time I ever rode in a Volvo. I must have been maybe 7 or 8 years that I can remember. I had a girlfriend in elementary school, the 2nd grade, and her parents, they drove a Volvo 850, brand new at the time. This must have been, I don't know, early 90s, 92, 93, I don't know when that car came out, 91, early 90s at least, an 850 station wagon with these beautiful leather seats. And I just remember sitting in the back of that Volvo. It was so nice. And for some reason, maybe the way the leather is worn in this car, how it looks, the color of it, how it shines, just reminds me of that beautiful Volvo 850. That was my first encounter with Volvo, and from that moment I thought, yeah, Volvo, they made very nice cars, very special cars, luxury cars, not quite like the Germans, but nice cars either way. Driving the XC60 T8 is a very pleasurable experience. It's most definitely set up to be a bit more sporty than something like a Mercedes GLC. I've been asked that question. Somebody have seen a video of mine earlier of this XC60 last year when it came out, where I said the ride was a bit stiff on 20s, stiffer than I would like, and something like a Mercedes GLC would ride better. This car has 19-inch wheels on studless winter tires, and I think they've sorted out to ride better. This doesn't ride as hard or as harsh as that XC60 did last year. We all know that Volvo have been tweaking their software, especially with their suspension setups, their body control and stuff like that, since, well, my first XC90, which came out in 2015, or I had a 2016 model year. My new XC90 is very different to drive than that. Much better setup suspension. And we're just gonna take a U-turn here, turn around. So I'd like to think that Volvo have, you know, refined the suspension a bit in this car because it doesn't feel as stiff as that first XC90 I drove last year. But it's most definitely set up stiffer than something like a GLC on air suspension. That doesn't mean it's uncomfortable, not at all. What it does mean is that this car has impeccable body control. It almost drives like a V60. And that is really, really high praise because the Volvo V60 is basically the best driving Volvo I've ever driven. Yes, you do have some more motion. You have a taller center of gravity, or a higher center of gravity. You have more mass, but it's very well hidden because this just drives very nicely. It doesn't roll about at all. It has very tight body control. You don't have a lot of body motion. It just feels very, very buttoned down. So from a driving perspective, this would be, I'd say, about 8/10 of a Volvo V60. And but being much more comfortable because the Volvo V60 actually doesn't have as much suspension treble than this. It's set up even stiffer. I think this is a very nice middle ground between something like a, well, let's say an XC90 and a V60. Having 407 horsepower, this thing really shifts. I think it's been tested 0 to 60 time of just below 5 seconds, 4.9, and when you mash the throttle, this thing just picks up speed so stupidly quick, and it just keeps going and going and going. It's so relentless, and the brakes are amazing. I've complained about the brakes in my XC90, my T8 XC90, them being just very artificial and feeling strange and not being linear at all. These brakes feel like normal brakes, and that's high I apologize. That's high praise to Volvo, and I'll have to contact my local Volvo dealer to have them check out if there is a software update, because these brakes are night and day compared to my XC90. The power, back to the power, because this has an electric motor out rear, which isn't connected to the front wheels or to any drivetrain. It can work independently. So you have torque fill, where there are dead spots in the power band of the gas engine, but you also have immediate response. And this thing, so it's dry outside, I'm going straight, and then traction controls starts blinking at 90 kilometers an hour. This thing is hilariously fast. It's just a very fun car to drive. It's just a very solid car to drive. This XC60, it really does impress me. Having driven the V60, different variants of that in, the past few months, that this car, I haven't driven this car since last year, almost a year ago. I drove an XC60, and it's just so impressive. It just feels so solid. It feels so tight, this car. Lastly, I just want to talk a bit about the exterior styling of this XC60. So this was the third car, you can say, fourth car of Volvo's new design language. First it was the XC90, and then the S90 V90, and then the V90 Cross Country, and then this. So third or fourth, depending on how you count those cars. I think it is a very, very nice looking exterior, one of the best looking in class actually. Classic Thorshammer LED lights now, and the rear end treatment, also the stance of the car. I like that it isn't the largest car. It is a bit shorter, a bit lower than, something like an XC90. And I also love the rear end of the car. Overall, a very, very good looking car. That was the XC60. So now let's hop into the XC90 and see what this feels like. So opening up the door, immediately the door feels a lot more heavy. And the door on this feels very heavy, but this door just feels exceptionally heavy. And stepping into the cabin here, yes, we have a different interior color. This is the blonde leather, so everything is much lighter, a much nicer atmosphere in my opinion. But the first thing you notice is that it's much more airy in here. The cabin, the dashboard is much more far away from you. As you can see, it angles away, and it's just much wider and taller here in this cabin. So it's immediately a much more welcome place to come, much more inviting. Pulling away from a standstill in this car is very similar to the XC60 due to the drivetrain being the same. But the first thing I notice is that the brakes here feel very, very different. It almost feels like the car is lacking power brakes because the pedals is just so hard to press and so hard to modulate. It's just a very odd experience. And also the steering is much heavier on this car, and both cars are set to individual drive mode settings, where both steerings are set to medium weight, it's actually called. So this car just feels much more hefty right out of the box. Over the first speed bump here, and it's apparent right away, even though this car is on 22-inch wheels. And remember that, guys, 19s versus 22s, that's a big difference. This thing just rides so beautifully over that bump. This air suspension setup, this car doesn't pretend to be sporty. It doesn't even try to be sporty. It's just all out a luxury car. And the suspension tuning on this car is so comfortably, even on 22-inch wheels, guys, this is a very comfortable ride. Yes, the low profile tires and the wide tires, 275 wide, means that you have a bit more fidgeting. You do feel some the tire feels more busy, if that makes any sense, but the suspension just copes with it very, very well. And even the hardest and sharpest of impacts are felt more in the XC60 than in this car. And then it's, once you're on the move, also that both the engine is much more hushed. This much more less tire noise, even though this has much wider tires, 235s on the XC60 and 275s here, and barely any wind noise. So this is just a much more isolated, a much more cocooned place to be and sit. But the trade-off is, well, here even this isn't this road doesn't curve much, but it does have a few undulations. The pavement isn't very nice here, so the car moves. There's much more body motion. That is the trade-off for having, well, a car that's almost 2.3 tons. Being this comfortable on these types of wheels means that you have much more body motion. But I don't mind it as much. My girlfriend, she hates it. She always complains when I drive this car, but I have it in my individual mode where I have the suspension set to the softest. If you put this car into pure mode, it lowers down the suspension and it becomes much more like the XC60. And then you can also put it in power mode, or you can just have the sports suspension set up in your individual mode, and then it will be much sharper to drive. But, well, I'm of the opinion, if you're gonna have a luxury vehicle, have a luxury vehicle. If you want your car to be comfortable, if you buy an XC90 for comfort, well, set it to the most comfortable setting, and you just have to live with the body control, because, well, there's no large SUV I can think of that is this comfortable and also gives you this sporty driving. I think it's a very hard and very tall order. What I really do like with this XC60 is that you sit properly high up. So you sit properly high up both in the cabin, and the car is also a bit taller than the XC60. And here you have no compromise. You have a large greenhouse. The rear window doesn't rake at all. It's basically totally upright. You have these large windows, and you just have this expansive view sitting so tall. So it just feels more majestic sitting and driving the XC90 than it does driving the XC60. The XC60 is a brilliant car in so many ways, but at the end of the day, it just feels like an SUV, right? It just feels like a crossover. But this, well, I used to love, or I still love, Range Rovers, the big boy Range Rovers, the large one, not the sports and not the Velours and the Evoques, about the big boy Range Rovers. And the reason I love that is because it's just uncompromised luxury. It doesn't pretend to be any sporting. And here, sitting in this car with these beautiful materials, with this Alcantara, this Nubuck roofline, and these, you know, leather covered sun visors. Yes, these are leather stitched, and the grab handles also being leather stitched. The whole package, it just makes this feel much more special than the XC60. It just feels Range Rover like. It almost feels Bentley like in here. So how does all that mass and all this size you know, affect performance? Well, same powertrain, and for being such a huge SUV, this thing is hilariously quick. No, it's not as quick as the XC60. It just isn't. I think 0 to 60 is just above 5 seconds, so 5.2, 5.3 seconds. I've even read other publications clocking it in a bit slower, but I think around about half a second, little less than half a second slower to 0 to 60 than the XC60 is about correct. You do feel that this car has much more mass to pull around. It's not as immediate, the power, but it's still a very large SUV. It's not as quick, you know, from a standstill, but once you get moving, I think this is just as quick as the XC60. But that is the XC60 from a standstill is just almost brutal. That thing is just so quick. And then here on the twisty roads, the same twisty roads we tested the XC60. Well, I do apologize. Well, it's as I said, it's no sports car. It handles itself nicely. You can put it into, you know, power mode, make the suspension lower, stiffens up everything. But I think that's just pointless. I like to set the car into one setting and just drive it as it's meant to be driven, not, you know, just change settings back and forth. I just like to drive, so find my, well, you can customize it. So I like it soft, I like it tall. You might like it different. Well, it is what it is, and I think it's just brilliant the way this car drives. Overall, the exterior styling of this car, I think, is still one of the prettiest that Volvo make, and I actually think it's one of the best aging designs they have yet. I think this has aged and will age better than the XC60. Maybe I think the S90 V90 will be the car that ages the best, but maybe this will, because 3 years on, almost 4 years on, 3 years on, guys, this is still the best looking SUV on the market, and especially with these beautiful 22-inch wheels. I know that's not, you know, fair to compare, because the XC60 only had the 19s, and this beautiful, this classic rear end that is actually only now in the XC90 series. So I think this is just a beautiful, beautiful design, and I think it just looks, the size and just the classic, you know, the smooth lines, the classic lines. They haven't tried to do anything over the top. It's just understated luxury. It just looks very majestic, and when I see these on the road while driving my own or not driving my own, I just think they look very, very, very beautiful, guys. So, driven both cars now. The XC60 is parked up there. The XC90 is parked up there. Which car is the best car? Which car wins this comparison? Well, there is a reason this is parked outside of our house. This is my second XC90 in, well, a little less than 3 years or 2 years. I don't remember. 2 years, 3 years. My head's just not with me at the moment. This is a brilliant car. I love this car so much, and it is cheaper than this car, no doubt in my mind. And I think it actually drives better. This is sportier. It has better body control. It is better to drive. It's a more positive driving experience from a driving perspective. But this thing, especially when spec'd out correctly, when you've ticked off the right boxes, just feels like a much, much more special car. It's bigger. It has much more presence. It's just much more majestic. I just love the XC90, and at this point in my life, I feel like I always have to have an XC90 in my life. I'm thinking about well, what will be my next XC90? Hopefully there'll be a facelift next year, or the year after. I will have to have this car for 2 years. I can't swap it out before 2 years are over, but well, you never know. But I just love the XC90. No, it doesn't drive as good, but it rides better. The interior is just so spectacular, and I think it looks better overall on the exterior. I think it's aged better. I think it will age better. I think it just looks much more special and much more classic. So guys, that is my choice, and that is the comparison between the 2018 Volvo XC60 T8 Inscription and the 2018 Volvo XC90 T8 Inscription. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and please let me know which car you would actually choose down below. I posted on Instagram last week. It will be now, if scheduling is correct, which car of these two you would choose, and almost everybody chose the XC90. But still, let me know what car you would choose, what car you did choose, if you had, if you were cross-shopping these two cars. So if you liked today's video, please drop me a thumbs up down below, and for more car content, as always guys, please subscribe. See you guys later, and goodbye.
We'll be right back.